And the next session will be moderated by someone who's passionate about giving children the opportunities to find their strength and way in life. It all began with a 15-year-old girl who was bored of school, and she promised herself that if she ever had kids of her own, she would create a school that wasn't boring at all. And several years later, she did just that, founding the first Montessori school in Norway. She is a successful businesswoman. Charities and empowerment centers for youth in Norway and abroad have come to life thanks to her commitment to the young generation. Please welcome founder of Partnership for Change, Ingrid Stange.
The issue of education holds many facets. For a large group of children and youth, the mere access to education is an unreachable goal. 2 years away from 2015, around 70 million children are still missing out on their right to education. Although the Millennium Goal number 2 holds the ambition to ensure that children everywhere, boys and girls alike, will be able to complete the full course of primary schooling, we have a long way to go. 700 million, or 10% of the world population, are not able to read. But what about the privileged group who do have access to education? In this part of the world, spending on education increases every year. And from 2000, countries have increased spending by 35%. In the EU countries, average spending as a percentage of GDP was 5.4% in 2009. With an individual range from 8.7 to 4.2%. Children and youth, or the most privileged of these, normally spend more than 20 years from the age 3 to reach a university degree or finish a vocational education. This represents 1/4 of their lifespan. In this section, we will raise the question, is it a privilege? Do we give these youth a meaningful time in school while they are in the educational system, and do we prepare them for a meaningful future afterwards? Do we help them unleash their potential? We live in a world where change happens faster than we have ever seen before. We heard that in the panel earlier. Do we prepare youth for this world? Do we train the young generation to become literates in the term of what the new world requires? The educational system was built in a time when change happened so slowly that we could hardly notice it. The skills needed then were to follow rules, establish processes, and understand and remember the established facts. Today, and even more so in the future, these skills will not bring you very far in society. To succeed now, you need to be able to see and understand the trends as they come. Even more so, you need to be in the forefront of these trends. In the 80s, fast change took the form of technology shifts. We heard about the telefax here earlier. The telefax was one such shift. I can remember when we got the first telefax in my office when I worked in McKinsey. It was a revolution. We totally changed technology, we thought. The telex machine could be thrown out. Today, we talk about total disruption. We no longer need to send information between one office and another. We work on the same working sheet regardless of where we are in the world. So in this society, following the rules and remembering established facts is the only safe thing that you can know will marginalize you in your job. So what will these disruptive times mean in terms of educational needs? While we see an exceptional change, we also know that the need for an even faster change is big, as we talked about earlier this morning. We cannot find 2.5 planets, so we have to totally change the way we are working. So innovation will have to be even faster, and how do we prepare the coming generation and the present generations for the skills needed for this disruption, even in innovation? How can the teacher teach the student when the teacher does not have a clue about what the student needs? Well, we do have some clues. To understand the climatic changes, we need to have basic understanding of science. We need to understand the ecosystems. We need to have a basic understanding of physics. We need to have an understanding of the mathematic relationships. And to avoid historic mistakes, we need to have a thorough understanding of history. Let me give you one example which is very active in the newspapers right now. Our constitution, which we will very proudly celebrate in 2 days, had a paragraph that we were very ashamed of. Jews were not allowed in the country. In the middle of the last century, or not the last, but the 1800s, this rule was abolished. Still, during the World War II, the Nazis were helped by the Norwegian police to collect all the Jews and send them to Auschwitz. We are not very proud of that. We are ashamed. But then, when we read the newspapers today about another group of people that we should throw out of the country, and that we, if only performing a minor offense, we should just let them leave the country, why aren't we ashamed? To be able to become the change makers we need, we must allow entrepreneurship to develop, we must allow leadership skills to develop, and we must allow people skills and cognitive empathy to develop. How can we create learning environments that builds a generation that will become the innovative leaders, individuals we need? Ashoka has the goal to make everyone a change maker. How do we prepare for that? Children come to school with an eagerness to learn and with open minds. Society depends upon the children maintaining this eagerness to learn. How can education help students keep the open minds? Dr. Stephen Hughes, Director of the Center for Research and Developmental Education, will talk about his findings and thoughts on this theme. When I first heard Dr. Hughes, I have to admit it was a very emotional minute for me. Having spent 1/3 of my life building and running Montessori schools, I must admit there have been times when the uphill battle was so steep I wondered if it was really worth it. But I must admit, having heard Dr. Hughes talk about his belief in what works in education, I understood it definitely was. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Hughes.
Majesty, thank you all. And thank you, Ingrid, for inviting me. Okay, oh man, it's 3 o'clock. Now at home, where I live in Minnesota, it's time to wake up. But I think I want to roll over and take a little nap now, because it's been a long and very interesting day. So maybe we should begin with a little bit of audience participation.
Yeah.
Who here is connected to higher education in some way? Okay. Who here is connected to, I guess what we would call elementary education in our country? Some, okay. Who's connected to high school in some way? Who's connected to elementary? Maybe age 6 to 12, 6 to 9. How about early childhood? Anyone connected to early childhood? And how many people are here today? Almost everybody. Good. So, a lot of people are connected to education. And I have a question for you. I want you to consider this question. What should school be for? If you're connected to education, you've thought about that. If you have a child, you've thought about that. I want today to think a little bit more about that. And I want to frame some of our thinking with a quote from this man. Does anybody know who this is? He wrote that book. Okay, one more show of hands. Who's read Future Shock? Who's even heard of it? This man is Alvin Toffler. And not long ago, he said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And it resonates, doesn't it? It resonates with all of us. And at a certain level, we understand that he's referring to this. He's referring to the toolkit that resides within each of our ears, within the inside of our heads. He's talking about a brain that works well, that can adapt. There's some things we know about brains. We know, for example, that brains develop. but they don't develop automatically. We know that brain development is experience dependent. And if you remember nothing else from my few minutes with you here today, remember that. Brain development is experience dependent. And when we consider the question, what should school be for? I would like to offer my answer to that question. Maybe it's yours too. School should be for assisting this process, for doing everything necessary to help every developing brain get its best shot at going as far as it can go. There are individual differences in capability. Some brains can go further than others. But I want to offer to you that the purpose of school should be to help every developing brain get its best shot. And what's important is that we know an awful lot about how to give every developing brain its best shot. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about some things that we know about how to give every developing brain its best shot. For starters, I need to begin by talking about movement, cognition, and executive functions. And now all of you will go to sleep. Because it sounds kind of dry, doesn't it? All of us have seen some kind of an illustration or diagram like this, kind of a medical drawing of the human body. Maybe some of you know that the human body is actually mapped on the surface of your brain. In fact, it's mapped in two places. There's a part of the surface of our brain that has a map of our body that has to do with movement, and another one that has to do with sensory processing. And as we look at how that map is laid out on the surface of our brain, we're looking now kind of like at a slice of bread, okay? So this is the surface of the brain. You might notice something interesting about that map. You might notice that that map does not exactly represent the version of your body that you're accustomed to seeing, right? You might notice there where the two hemispheres face each other, that's where the feet are, and the feet are kind of small in their representation. We see as we roll along the surface of the brain that the hand is remarkable in its representation on that map of our body and our brain. And as you go further, you see that the mouth and face are also remarkably represented. And this is the neurological explanation for why necking feels so good. Kissing, making out. Because there's so much sensation around this part of our face that there's a lot of input there when we're with our partners. Or ideally, there's a lot of input there when we're with our partners. And if you take that map of your brain and make a figure out of it, this is the figure you get. This is called the sensory motor homunculus. And this is you. This is you, I would argue, in a more realistic way than the version of you that you see in the mirror in the morning after you take a shower, because this is your brain's version of you. And what is your brain all about? Your brain is all about hands. In fact, think about this when you see a young child engaging with the world. What do? They grab, they touch, it goes to the mouth as well, but they're engaging with the world using their hands. I want to share with you some research about how important the hands and movement are when it comes to cognitive development. This is Dr. Adele Diamond. She's a world-famous developmental cognitive neuroscientist. This is an article she published in the year 2000. Quite a title, Close Interrelation of Motor Development and Cognitive Development and of the Cerebellum and Prefrontal Cortex. Motor development and cognitive development may be fundamentally interrelated, more so than has been previously appreciated. They may be fundamentally intertwined. Cognition, thinking, and movement are intertwined. Another paper, long title, Cognition is Unavoidably Linked to Movement, Rodney Cotterill, 2001. Cognition is unavoidably linked to movement. A recent book published in my field by two friends of mine, Len Koziel and Deb Budding. Len recently wrote to me, he said, it's like this, Steve, a vertebrate brain did not evolve or develop to think. A brain evolved to control action. Plain and simple. It is all for the control of action, meaning the control of movement. Your brain, all of your brain, evolved to control movement. Now this is another essential part of your brain. This is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is involved in sequencing, coordinating, and programming motor sequences. But we also use it for some other pretty important things. We use it for this domain of reasoning skills that we call executive functions. It's important for problem solving, for reasoning, and for planning, and most fundamentally, it's essential for profound vital cognitive operations necessary for all effective human behavior. It's here where resides inhibitory control, the ability to stop and think before acting. It's here where working memory resides, which is where we hold information while we perform some process on it, essential for creativity, essential for empathy. It's here where resides cognitive flexibility. When we are pursuing plan A and that's not working out, how do we make the shift to plan B? Some of us are married to people who don't know how to shift to plan B. You might have direct awareness of how important that capability is. Executive functions have been shown to be more important for school readiness than IQ or early reading or math skills. In a paper published by Dr. Diamond, she writes, clearly to improve school readiness and academic success, targeting executive functions is critical. EFs remain critical for success throughout life and for positive mental and physical health. And here's our friend again, the sensory motor homunculus, because one of the most important ways we can develop the prefrontal cortex is by engaging in certain kinds of motor activity. Here we see a child from the article who's practicing Taekwondo. It turns out that classical martial arts, which requires the precise sequencing of motor movements, supports the development of this region in the brain. And here we see a picture of a child in a Montessori classroom. This is for you, Ingrid. And this child is performing an activity called walking on the line, which requires and practices precise motor movements, because self-control begins with carefully controlling the self. I now want to talk about the importance of repetition, trial, and error. Who knows what this is? Who's played Tetris? Who's played Tetris a lot? The first time you played Tetris, your brain looked like this. Seriously, this is from an actual research study of Tetris, okay? And this is a novice Tetris player's brain, and what it is right now is fully lit up. It's hard to play Tetris, isn't it? There's actually a learning curve that's been identified for Tetris, and when you play Tetris for about 45 days, your brain gets really, really good at it. And the pattern of activation of your brain while playing Tetris goes from this to this. Obviously, the corollary is that video games destroy your brain. No, that's not the corollary. What's happened is this brain has gotten really good at playing Tetris. Now, what's it been doing? It's been trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing and getting better, but still trying and failing and getting better, but still trying and failing. And finally, after about 45 days of pretty intense trial and error work, that brain has become an expert at playing Tetris. The only area that you see activated there is the right hand, basically controlling the joystick. Now that's your brain the first time you sat behind the wheel of a car. And that's what it looked like after you became an expert at driving a car. And for that matter, this is the first time you got on a bicycle. And after you practice that for a while, this is how it looked later. Because this is the process that your brain goes through whenever you're learning a new skill or activity. Trial and error. Your brain learns through trial and error. And you already know this. Think about everything that you do on your job that you had to learn how to do. You know, all meaningful learning takes place through analysis of error. All meaningful learning takes place through analysis of error. And that's how our brains figure things out. What else do we want to say? We want to talk about the importance of environmental enrichment. Because if we are going to give every developing brain its best shot, there's things that we can do to help assure that. One, we can talk about this man, Donald Hebb, who was a rat psychologist and also a very nice father, because it emerges that back in the 40s, when he was in the height of his career, he would sometimes take rats home from his lab for his children to raise as pets. We know that because in 1947 he published a paper about the surprising performance of those rats when they came back to the lab, because when those rats came back to the lab, they were smarter than they were supposed to be. And this was a new finding in 1947. Can you imagine? It must have been that the general feeling was, feed the child until he or she gets old enough to do something interesting, and then we'll educate them. But what Hebb demonstrated was the things that go on in the earliest years are essential for how well that brain will develop. And this paper lit a firestorm. Here's an article from 1962. That's the visual cortex and total cortex size in a rat brain raised in an impoverished environment, and that's what it looks like when it's raised in an enriched environment. It weighs more, there's more connections. It's a smarter, better brain. That's what we get from environmental enrichment. There are certain features that we're aware of that assist with environmental enrichment. Larger spaces, larger groups, opportunities for more complex social interaction, even more complex social interaction, taking place in an environment that is itself more complex. And the studies with animals, they change food locations, they change the materials in the cage, and they also offer them opportunities for physical activity. Guess which is the enriched environment for the rat? Now, everything you want for a developing brain, you simply get more of if that brain is raised under conditions like this. Think about for human children. I also want to talk about the importance of developmental trajectories. Here we have a study published in 1988. This is the developmental jumps and pauses of 4 pairs of identical twins. You follow me here? 4 individual pairs of identical twins. Jump, pause, jump, pause, jump, pause. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Strikingly similar. And when you compare across pairs of fraternal twins, what you get is something that's dramatically different. Fraternal twins don't show nearly the same similarity between each other in developmental trajectory. In fact, you probably noticed that they don't look like, each pair doesn't look like another pair. Each pair has its own unique trajectory. Each unique configuration of genes has its own developmental trajectory. And when you reduce the number of genes in common by half, the trajectories get different from each other. What this shows us is that the typical expectation for education, that every child will learn at about the same rate and by the end of the school year they'll have gotten through all the same material, it's not so. In fact, anybody who's been in a classroom understands that every child grows and develops at his or her own rate. They start at different points and they end at different destinations. And there's nothing much we can do about that, apparently, because this rate is substantially genetically driven. Now it's the end of the school year, everybody started someplace different, and everybody ended up someplace different. Finally, I want to talk about, here they are. Here are the 4 concepts I've talked about. And here's the problem. I think that schools should be giving every developing brain its best shot. And to do so, teachers must become curators of developmental experience. Curators of individualized developmental experience. And here's the problem. While we should be giving that guy opportunities to engage in this kind of activity, what school substantially has become about now, at this point in the 21st century, is this kind of an environment where children sit at desks. He's loving it. Even in early childhood, there's a teacher in charge of this, because here teaching is telling, and even in an early childhood environment, the teacher is in charge. The teacher is telling. The model is that there's content to tell you, the child. We're going to share information with you, and then of course, we'll give you a test to see how well you're doing. We'll assay your virtue with standardized testing. And there's a problem with that, because when standardized testing enters education, the scope of legitimate activity that can be undertaken in schools narrows automatically and always to those few things that are measured in standardized testing. Yeah, it's actually way more boring than when you were there, because teaching to the test is an epidemic. Teaching to the test is an epidemic around the world. And if you remember nothing else, if someone is trying to sell you standardized testing as a way of improving your society, they are lying to you. You will destroy your public education if you contract this virus of standardized testing. This is one of the outcomes we've experienced in the US. There must be something different. There must be a different way. There must be alternative ways of evaluating public education that place the responsibility not on the child's learning of an increasingly narrow set of facts. Perhaps evaluating the developmental quality of the environment. There must be something else. If someone is trying to sell you standardized testing, they will destroy your education, and it will take at least a generation to unravel that. Thank you for listening.
Stoeckle is the Vice President of Education Development Center's Health and Human Development Division. Rebecca's aim is to use innovative design elements and maximize impact to reach specific audience in the training efforts. As the mother of 4, I know that there are at least 4 ways of learning, and as Stephen told us, there are probably 7 billion. We need to be able to create both high-impact strategies and individually targeted educational processes. Please welcome Rebecca Stoeckle. By the way, before Rebecca comes in, I did forget to tell you that Steve is a neuroscientist, which you probably understood from his speech. Thank you. Rebecca.
Thank you, Ingrid. I have to confess, I was standing behind the curtain thinking I've got to come on and make the case that technology-enabled learning can be as joyful and as interactive as a Montessori classroom, and that it can prepare young learners to be engineers and entrepreneurs and really change the world. And I have 10 minutes. So Chelsea Clinton called on and said we need lots of sweat at this conference. I'm contributing mightily right away. I actually think I'd like to begin by affirming what the Crown Princess asked us to do this morning, and that is to listen to young people, to hear them, and to see what they have to say. I'm going to show a short video of a young man who participated in a technology-blended online course in South Africa. He's a young entrepreneur, and he's going to be much more effective than I could. Isn't technology amazing? There it goes. Oops. I spoke too soon.
I think maybe business was my call. I used to buy some packets of sweets and I would sell those sweets to other children at school. I love not to be dependent to some other people, and it's good when you start earning your own money, when you start to see that you can save a little for yourself. I run a small internet cafe business here in Kailicha. Technology advances every day and people need to use computers, they need to use internet, they need to communicate with other people. I felt like there was a need for these services in the community. I got started with 2 computers. It was really small, then it was a challenge. I struggled to manage the operations of the business. It was running, but it wasn't running very well. It was last year in August when I decided to attend the training for HP Life. It was actually interesting and at the same time exciting to see how to manage the operations of the business, how to manage the finances of the business, and how to communicate with your clients. It was great when we were taught on financial management, because that's the other side I was really struggling on. The most important thing I have learned with HP Life is to do things quicker in a very, very professional way. After my training at HP Life, I decided to restructure my whole business. And now everything is progressing very well. Thank you to HP for coming into my life.
There's the joy in that young man's story. This is a cell phone tower in the Masai Mara, and I think there are a lot of people in the audience who travel around the world, and I'm sure, raise your hand if you've seen a cell phone or a cell phone tower in a context that you can hardly believe. Yeah? I think it's become sort of a trite thing to say that broadband is now everywhere, and that PCs and tablets and cell phones are becoming ubiquitous. And the transformative thing about that, of course, is that it opens up access to young learners who otherwise would not be able to participate. And by that I mean a young girl in Afghanistan who is shut out of the classroom because girls are not permitted to learn. Or a young person in Bangladesh who may need to work during school hours but has time available in the evening when they could be participating in learning. So that transformative access is really important. But access isn't everything, of course, because just the words on the page or even a video of a really fantastic physics lecture, that's not how real learning happens, and we know that. We need relevance and feasibility and scalability to make sure that we're really bringing knowledge and changing lives. And I'm going to give 3 short case examples of technology-enabled interventions that we've developed, each of which I think makes a slightly different point about what we can do. I want to start by affirming what we've heard over and over again, that young learners really need to be in charge of their own education. They need the opportunity to customize their learning experience and to be deeply engaged with it. It has to be relevant, and that means we have to begin by working with them at the very outset of our design processes to be sure that we understand what they need and how they want to learn. You know, we noted, I said already that cell phones are becoming ubiquitous, and actually they're so cheap now, you see them everywhere. The limiting factor is increasingly the cost of the data plan. I've been in places in Africa where families spend more for their monthly data plan than they do for food. And so this young lady is using a very simple feature phone on which is loaded a basic literacy program that we developed that lives on a small memory card. And it can be loaded into this feature phone, and that means that that young lady and her classmates in Mali can learn how to read and write, and therefore think of the opportunities that that opens up to them. And they can do it anytime, anywhere, and at no cost. I also want to note that because this content and this experience is so valuable to these young learners, we now have a major telecom partner who is helping us to distribute this elsewhere in Western Africa, because they know that that content is value added for their customers. It helps their business model, and it means that this is sustainable. And there's nothing that matters more than sustainability in the long run. Here's another classroom. I'm sorry to say we've got students behind the desk, but in a way, it actually helps me to make my point that in many contexts, not just in the developing world, the limiting factor in really good education is the quality of the teaching and the instruction. And we're going to hear later in the panel from someone who's working with the Khan Academy that pioneered the so-called flip the classroom model. I think that's a really great example of how that technology can circumvent that limitation in teacher training and preparation. This is a much more low-tech endeavor, and in that way it's really helpful in some less resource contexts. If you squint, you can see on the table here a very small, inexpensive device that sits on a tabletop, and it converts an ordinary cell phone into an MP3 player. And using that, we can transmit voice and data into the classroom to bring high-quality interactive education. And when I say that, it's not just a lesson. These are soap opera-style storytelling and then related exercises that the students do in pairs and small groups and going out into their community to learn about things like money management and how to start or build a business. This is happening in Somalia, which is a very tough learning environment. We've got great learning outcomes and data showing that. And interestingly, the teachers really welcome it as well. So it's a nice model for a relatively low-tech intervention. The last example I'm going to show is actually sort of on the other end of the scale. It's EDC's first foray into the so-called MOOC space, massive open online courses that are really one of the things that are changing the world. We designed this, again, with support from HP to support young learners around the world who want to start or grow a business. And we're now in operation. We have users in every country in the world except for, last time I checked, Greenland and the Central African Republic. So if you know somebody there, I want their email. I want to get them on the map that shows where we're operating. We need to build tools that are clearly connected to the work that people need to do. And so we do a lot of formative research to understand what are the real-life contexts, challenges, problems that these young learners will have in their environment. And I want to just scroll quickly through a couple of pragmatic features that we've developed to help to engage that very broad target audience digitally. Because we know we're working with hundreds of thousands of learners around the world, we want to offer not just a course, but a learning community. And so we build social learning features that allow them to connect with one another and with mentors and with markets for their goods and services, and to themselves become full and active participants in the global community. We use low bandwidth, low literacy pedagogy like photonovellas because we know that storytelling is a great way to create empathy. And in many traditional cultures, storytelling is how wisdom is transmitted. It's how young people learn to address problems and figure out what's the right thing to do. It's also pretty cheap to produce, which matters. Because we're online, we can offer training in many languages. HP Life is currently online, live in English and in Spanish. By the end of the year, we'll be fully functional in French and Arabic and in Portuguese, and boy, we're chasing Chinese as hard as we can so that we can be everywhere in the world. And I think this business of being able to offer people what the learning in their native language is very important. I was pleased to see that there's a session tomorrow that's partially in Norwegian. That seems right and fitting. I think it's a form of respect to offer that to people. This is an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times around the beginning of this year, and it got a lot of play and excitement because it seemed to capture the transformative promise of online learning to really bring access to all kinds of learners around the world who've been shut out of the equation. But you know what? Just a couple of weeks later, the New York Times editorial board printed this caveat that said, wait a minute, let's not move too fast, because online learning doesn't yet work as well as we want it to for our most vulnerable learners. So I hope if you're building an online course or you're developing a mobile app, come talk to me. We have a lot of lessons learned. But also, please consider these questions. When you're thinking about your content and your instructional design, engage with your learners at the front end. If you can, use what's called a human-centered design process that sends your designers out into the field to really live and work alongside in the context in which your learners will be learning. When you're building your technical design, keep in mind what is going to be feasible in your user's context. Will they be able to use streaming video? Are they learning primarily on a mobile phone? And if so, design for what can be effective on that very small screen. And finally, take into account how you're going to do the implementation. Will it be a flip the classroom model? Will it be a direct-to-consumer model like most MOOCs are at this time? And how's that going to be sustained over time? It's really critical to engage with local partners who can take on and own your intervention. Many of you probably recognize this photograph. It's Tahrir Square on the night of, I believe, February 18th, 2011, just days before thousands of young people came together with their passion and their idealism and their cell phones to change the world. It's possible. It's happening right now. But we've seen in the years since that moment that change will not be for good. And by that I mean positive change and also sustained change unless we continue to engage. We as adults need to be transmitting, working alongside, sharing our wisdom, getting wisdom from the young people, and making sure that the change that happens is good and is sustained. So I hope you'll get out there and join in this process. Thank you so much.
So one issue is how to learn, and another is what to learn. McKinsey and Company performed a study in December, or represented a study in December called From Education to Employment, where they saw that there was a totally discrepancy between what the students learn and what business needs or what the employers need. So while the employer rate work ethics, teamwork and leadership as the most important skills, the educators did not see this as important at all. So please welcome Tom Isherwood of McKinsey's Dubai office, who will tell us some more about this interesting and very important study.
Thank you, Ingrid. First off, thanks everybody for having me here. And secondly, I'm especially excited to be here as a Montessori student till the second grade, and as a current student learning coding online through a MOOC to come after these two presentations here. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is essentially based on the work that I've done over the last 4 years. And over the last 4 years, I've worked with my clients in the Middle East, mostly governments and international organizations, to try to understand how to get more youth from education to employment. What I mean by that is people who graduate from high school, how do we get them into sustainable jobs? And most recently, that culminated in a report that we released in December of last year. This is the cover of the report. I'll share with you some of the insights from the report a bit later on, but first let me just talk to you a bit about how I started working on this. I got involved in this first in 2010, working for an international organization in the Middle East, and we were putting together a report trying to understand what was the disconnect between education and employment in the Middle East. The reason this is such a confounding problem is that it's based on two problems that shouldn't happen at the same time. First, on the one hand, you've got widespread youth unemployment. 75 million youth between the ages of 15 and 24 around the world today looking for a job and can't find jobs. At the same time, you've got large numbers of employers that say that they can't find the talent they need. And this is the Manpower survey done a couple of years ago, put that at about 34%. Our own survey found that out of all of the open jobs, out of all the employers we surveyed, 40% of them stay open because the employers can't find people to fill those jobs with the right skills. Now, just to drive this home, these things shouldn't happen at the same time. On the one hand, you've got all of these people who are willing and able to work. And on the other hand, you have all of these jobs that need to be filled. So we did this research, but nobody much paid attention. And then 2011 happened. So what happened in 2011? Actually, it started in December 2010 in a small town in Tunisia, where a young man who wasn't able to ever get sustainable employment, working as a fruit vendor, had his fruit stand shut down, and then in a moment of frustration and desperation, doused himself in gasoline and set himself on fire. But that image of desperation captured the minds and the imagination of people all across Tunisia, leading 28 days later to the overthrow of the government, driven largely by frustrated youth who couldn't find jobs. And as was mentioned just now, that wasn't all. In January, very similar things started in Egypt, overthrowing that regime by February. And this wasn't only in the Arab world, obviously. That summer saw protests across Europe. In August, there were riots in London. And in September, the Occupy Wall Street movement started in the US. And so this was clearly a global issue. Needless to say, after 2011 happened, there was a lot more attention focused on exactly how to answer this question. So that takes us to 2012, which is when, in McKinsey, we kicked off our global research effort to try to get to the bottom of what actually is driving this disconnect and what can we do about it. So our research, we did two things. First, we conducted a survey across 9 countries all around the world of youth education providers and employers, trying to get different perspectives on the same problem. The second thing we did is we flew all around the world to look at examples of programs or institutions that were finding success at linking youth from the end of compulsory education to employment. Coming up with a total of about 100 case studies, successful case studies around 25 countries. Now, just to kind of bring the challenge into a bit of a sharper focus, 2 facts from the survey that came out. First one is that this disconnect is massive. So when we asked youth, again across 9 countries, do you think your education helped you to get a job? 50% of youth across the world said no, which seems like it should be a big problem. Now, and not only is the problem big, but there's also a real disconnect between the different players involved. We asked youth education providers and employers whether they thought that youth who finished post-secondary education were prepared to enter the workforce. Now, surprisingly, youth and employers both agreed that by and large youth are not ready at that point. So he's not prepared, not prepared by their post-secondary education. Whereas education providers were much more optimistic. So you have not only a large problem, but you've got a problem that it's hard to rally all the different stakeholders around a solution because they don't all see it the same way. So if you look at the overall journey that youth take, there's three steps. And there's breakdown, the process breaks down at each step. So the first place where the system breaks down is when youth go to enroll in post-secondary education. And this breaks down for a number of different reasons. Youth often don't have the information they need to know what programs to enroll in. They also may not have the money to attend. The second place it breaks down is in the classroom, when it comes to actually building skills in the classroom. Because all too often that education happens in a way that is theoretical or outdated, or teacher is telling, as was said in one of the earlier discussions. And then the third place where the system breaks down is actually after all of that is finished, after a student's actually successfully graduated with a degree or with a certificate. And then they can't get matched to the job that actually requires that, either because they don't know where to look, or because when they do find a job, there's no way to understand exactly what their credential means. So one question that people started to ask us as we were doing this research was, which country gets it right? And the answer to that, at least as far as I can tell, is that there's no country that gets this whole thing right. But what we did find is that there's individual programs and individual institutions that get pieces of this right. And if you take all of them together, you can start to imagine what a good system looks like. And maybe just to tell you kind of two common themes that run through all of these success stories, they're the following. First, very intimate connections between employers and education providers at every stage in the process. And secondly, innovation in terms of how to actually deliver that education. So it's not just teacher is telling. Let me give you a couple of examples about what I mean just to bring this to life. When I'm talking about a cohesive interaction between education providers and employers, this isn't just having an advisory council of employers who then meet once a year and give some opinions to the university. What this looks like when it's done really well is essentially cooperation on every level. And so one example is Amtech, which is a collaborative of 30 community colleges in the US and 30 automotive manufacturing plants. And what they do is, so the first place they started was on the curriculum. And so the curriculum got essentially vetted, and there was input to the curriculum from all of these institutions. So that the end result was one that the community colleges were confident they could teach, and also one that the employers were confident would actually prepare people for the jobs in their businesses. But that wasn't it, right? So they also co-located a lot of the classrooms. So for students in these programs, when you go and take your classes that are the industry-specific classes, you go to a classroom that's attached to the shop floor of the plant, which provides a lot of opportunities that you don't have otherwise. You can participate in the safety exercises in the mornings. You actually get a sense of what it's like to actually work there. It also gives a chance for the managers in the plant to participate in the education, either through giving comments on final presentations or just sitting in the class and entering into discussion. Clearly, there's even more than this, but just a couple of pieces. This is what I mean by really close collaboration. Second point, innovation and delivery. I mean, the biggest shock here to the delivery of education has been the introduction of online education. And I know that the MOOCs were mentioned in the last discussion. But one of the challenges with that is that there's a large number of students that actually aren't effectively addressed by existing education because they don't have the money or they don't have the time, but also not addressed by the MOOCs because they need more support to actually complete their education. So one interesting example that I think for me typifies what I think of when I'm thinking of innovation and delivery is Portmont College in Denver. This is a very new institution, started just this year. We want to be able to provide a high quality education for students who can't afford to go to regular college, but also need more support than they're going to get from online education. And so what they did is they said, what are the most important points where we need in-person contact, where we really need to give someone support? What are those most important few points? And how can we make sure we do those in a way that gives people the support they need to complete, while at the same time putting everything else online to bring down the cost so that anybody can afford it? And what they found is that you need in-person support when you're, essentially you need peers around you that you're connected with. You need a mentor or a coach who can answer questions and help pull you along. And you need teams to work on teamwork with and project work with. So they designed a program that essentially created that in-person interaction just at those points and put everything else online. It's almost like if you think of the typical 4-year college experience, and you take out all the different pieces, and then you put them together in a way that nobody's done before. So this is what I mean by innovation and delivery. Now, these two examples are both from the US. But I don't want to give the impression that this is only possible in the US or in the developed world. In fact, I'm convinced this is possible in the poorest countries and serving the poorest populations in the poorest countries. And so the last example that I'll leave you with is a large training company in India called ILNFS Skills. that has both a really close tie-up with employers and also has a real innovative delivery model. And just one quick point about each of those. The most interesting thing for me about how they tie up with employers is they actually only offer positions in their classes if they already have a letter from an employer certifying that there's going to be a job at the end of it. So if they get 30 letters from employers saying, I will hire someone, they've got 30 positions. And if they get no letters, they have no class. So there's such a close connection with the employers. And at the same time, they incorporate audio-visual instruction in a way that I think, actually maybe I'll show you the video on this so you can actually see what it looks like. Let me just play this.
We don't go for a certificate, we're going for a job. So we get the employer to get involved in making sure that the skills program that we're running with these people meets exactly their requirement.
They need to do these things with their hands. So the best way of teaching them is through audio-visual demonstration. So we have an expert operator on camera who is actually demonstrating each of those tasks.
We looked at how do you put technology into the value chain, the skill training value chain. With the kiosk, you just switch it on and the room gets transformed into a classroom. I think we built a very good standardized, scalable model of training. Whether it's in the northern part of India or southern or any other parts of India, it's standardized and is delivered to quality, which is what the industry needs.
Thought that I would get such a good job that I always wanted to work in a 5-star hotel. To be in that position, a person needs to have a degree of 3 years and has to have an experience of 2 years. The interviewer himself told me that, but just the things that I learned in 1 month was enough to give me and to get that job in my hand.
So let me leave you with that. There's plenty more in the report, but there's also plenty more people to hear from. Thanks a lot.
Most important thought leader in social entrepreneurship, I guess we can say, is Bill Drayton, who was the man who coined the concept thought leaders. He has given us a message for the conference. I will only here play a very short message from him regarding what he sees as the important learning for the young generation today. And while we're looking at that short video, I will invite Rolv-Erik Spilling and Jonas Goshbar into the panel here.
It is almost criminal to allow any child or young person to go into a world that is defined by change. That's what value is, without the ability to contribute. And that's what we're doing right now. So this is completely central, and the work of this gathering is incredibly important because hopefully it will change the future of Norway and help change the future of Europe and the world. So thank you.
So what Bill Drayton says here is that it's almost criminal not to prepare the young generation for the world they're meeting. First, Rolv-Erik Spilling, you represent the user or the employer of those that the producers of employment that you were talking about, producers of skills. What is your experience? You heard what McKinsey said here. There is a discrepancy. Could you please tell me, you are from the Telenor, you're head of the what's it called? The
Digital services.
Digital services of Telenor.
Yes.
Which means you're a high-tech user of high-tech skills.
Yes, I guess Telenor is providing services and internet to 11 countries in the world, and in that respect we see that there should be a reason for using the internet, of course, and that brings the services into space. And when we try to deliver relevant services, we see that of course the competence and the people who can do this today is quite different from what it was 5 or 10 years ago. So in that respect, the internet has opened up the vast set of possibilities for very young people in Asia or in Pakistan high educated people in Delhi or in Oslo in a new manner. And that, Rebecca mentioned that cooperation also.
Can you tell me, how did you as a firm go about deciding which new products and services you will need to offer? Can you explain the process?
That's difficult.
Yeah.
I think first criteria is that will there be a lot of users using the service itself? And will they, when they have the service, will they use it a lot? And if those two criteria is okay, then it's very relevant. Education is obvious. It's a vast area and it's a very important area, and it's very, of course, every single person wants to learn new things. And the more easy it is provided to you, the better the users will be. And I think we see a lot of examples on that.
But when you develop new products and when you meet new markets, you rely on employees that go beyond established skills.
Yeah.
What are you looking for? How do you define? What is the need from the people you want to employ? What do you need from them?
We look more after the creation, the ability to create new things on your own, but also together with other persons or people in teams. And that can be a 12-year-old kid, or it can be a highly experienced developer. But we see that when we are bringing people together and make passion around actually new services, it comes down to what you are able to create together in teams. Not that much necessary what kind of education you have, you can show on your CV in a sense. So it's, creativity is very important.
But do you find, do you have to do a lot to train them into participating effectively in the job, or are they ready-made?
No, of course, it's they are not ready-made at all. But we see that when we are bringing possibilities and putting certain tools in place for them, trying and failing is very, very important in that kind of process of making services. I mean, the whole internet way of doing services is about trying and failing. And that's a new way of building knowledge about what actually you should do. And that is the most important capabilities, I would say.
From my experience from running Montessori schools, I realized one of the major things I had to do was de-educate teachers to be able to think creatively. Is that something you have to do?
When I meet new employees which believe that they can by themselves change the world, we have some de-education to do. I mean, you have to see that you will always be a part of a team, and actually that is important. You cannot solve a huge problem by yourself, but you have to be relevant, and you will be significant in doing that. But a lot of students, they have been thinking so much for themselves that they forget that capabilities. Maybe this.
Thank you. Jonas, you represent the Khan Academy in Norway. I'm sure many of you know what the Khan Academy is, but maybe some don't. So could you please very briefly tell a little about what it is?
Yeah, well, the Khan Academy is a not-for-profit with a very humble beginning. From 2006 to 2010, it was Sal Khan, who is our founder. He made videos and uploaded them to YouTube. Initially, he tutored his cousin, and in 2010, Bill Gates in Google, within a week, gave $3.5 million, and he was able to hire some people to build a platform. That platform has exercises and a dashboard where teachers can connect to the students, and an arena for discussion. And our philosophy is master-based, self-paced learning. So you have to move through a step of exercises, and we assess whether or not the student is ready to move to the next level. So we ensure that every prerequisite is completed with a very high accuracy before a student moves on to a more difficult topic. So we bring the technology to enable the teachers to implement what educators have been trying to do for many years, which is self-paced learning and master-based learning. But it's just been difficult without the technology. I think Khan Academy is changing that. And obviously everything is free, and we want to translate our resources into 35 languages.
So, you told me, you're a medical student, and you told me that you may not have time to finish your medical students because you're so busy working with the Khan Academy. What made you volunteer as a Khan Academy teacher or producer or translator, rather?
Yeah, I really love the Khan Academy because I feel I've been a part of it from the beginning. As many who was involved, I started out as a user back in 2008. And the only way I could contribute was by donations, so I donated what I had. And eventually, Bill Gates gave his donation, and we were able to to start a translation project. So it was fairly obvious, being bilingual, that I joined that project, and I'm now responsible for Norwegian.
So you have more than 6 million unique users every month. And it's rapidly growing. What is the value of a large user base in digital learning that Rebecca was talking about? Can you tell us a little about that?
I'm very excited about that, and it's rarely mentioned in the media, but when you have 6 million unique users, you can apply some methods to optimize, in this case, learning, make it more efficient. 6 million users equate to over 1 billion data points, and with 1 billion data points to work with, you can do amazing optimization. For example, when we try to implement some of the pedagogical principles like the spacing effect, where increased intervals will increase retention. So instead of randomly repeating something or repeating everything at once when exam time is approaching, you should repeat something perhaps the very next day, and then the next week, and after a month. And what Khan Academy can do is learn from the users how they interact with the site and optimize the points at when we hint that they should do a review. So many things like this and examples like these will make the learning experience more efficient. Even a 20% increase in, let's say, earned proficiency, which is very realistic, equates to over 2 or 3 years in school. So that means if we can eventually reach twice the efficiency, that means that every 8th grade student will do university mathematics. So I'm not sure if that is possible. It will be easy in the beginning. You will have high increases in efficiency, and once you reach a certain level, it will be more difficult. So we'll see how far it's possible to take that. But with many data points, I think that is in itself, in addition to accessibility and utilizing resources, or making the classroom time more creative and making the learning experience a lot better just by having the resources there. I think eventually optimizing it in itself has huge value, and it's obviously not possible with slow research in the real world. So it's sort of pedagogical research on steroids.
Thank you. Stephen, you showed us this fantastic picture showing the hands as the big part of the brain and the rest the very short part. Is there a danger that with all this technology that we lose sight of this, and how can we avoid that eventually?
Well, it depends on what application we're putting the technology to. One of the great things about Khan Academy is that it truly facilitates developmental education, at least at a certain age. My observation is that technology is quite distracting in the early years, but the kind of employee that you want to hire is somebody who knows how to interact with others, who knows how to work as part of a team. The kind of teachers that we probably want in our schools are those who enjoy working with children and have, bring sort of a developmental ethos to that. If a teacher has to deliver the same lecture this year, this day, that they gave last year, this day, to students who are in competition with each other to see who gets the best grade, that's not going to produce the employees that you want. And Khan Academy sort of frees us from that requirement. The notion of flipping education, so that lecture, which was going to be the same as it was going to be anyway, so that can happen at home during homework time, and then And then school becomes a seminar, a discussion format, children working together, young people working together. Those are the employees that you want to see, I think, those who have been able to have that experience instead of it being just the book, just the test. This also offers opportunities to experiment with different kinds of evaluation. I've been in the evaluation business for 20 years. You may gather that I don't like the evaluation business. It doesn't drive, maybe you got that as well. It doesn't drive the kinds of things that you need to hire and that we need to have our society and really have our planet survive. I mean, the people who scored highest on the test are in charge of things right now. Where is that bringing us?
That's a good question. Another challenge that I would like to ask you all about, with the technology, are we able to integrate the learning? That we have this tradition in schools from, I guess all traditional education is based on what we need to know as a student at the university, and then it's sort of transferred down to what a 6-year-old can manage to learn, which is absolutely not what a 6-year-old needs to learn and is ready to learn, because there's other things happening in that brain. And then we sort of divide the subjects into very separate subjects, and they don't fit together, and the child doesn't see where they fit together. Is technology helping us integrate these subjects better? What do you think, Tom?
I mean, I think that technology does a number of things. I mean, I think but whether it helps us integrate these subjects together, I'm not sure. And I think it certainly helps with self-paced learning. I think it also helps just to broadcast things to people that otherwise wouldn't have access. So I mean, I think Udacity has, there's a great story where it just started when the Stanford professor put his class online without even asking anybody. And within a week or so had 200,000 people signed up, right? So technology certainly gives us access. I'm not sure that technology solves this problem of how to integrate the various things people need to learn. I'd love to hear from others if somebody has a good idea for this, though.
What would you say, Rebecca?
I was going to say, I think, in another version of Flip the Classroom, we need to flip the question around. I think one of the very exciting things about technology-enabled learning is that it makes much more possible on a broader scale user-directed learning. So rather than our directing the integration, and I think we do, when we do instructional design, we try and do some of that curating and integrating, but learners themselves will seek out and find the things that are relevant and do that integration when we give them the power to make choices about what they're learning.
Yeah, Simon Kahn makes a point of this in his book. I'm not quite sure how we will solve the issue, but once you have self-paced learning, what is relevant or what you learned 6 months ago could be relevant for someone else at the same time. So you don't have this, you don't move on and forget what you did learn at that point in time. So when everyone in the class is at different points and you interact and the peers interact with each other, perhaps it's easier to draw lines between subjects and different topics within that subject, simply because you're exposed to it at different times. I think that's one element. Our website is still divided into subject areas, but you're not working on a topic at a given time specifically. I think that could help.
Of course, there is always, you have to separate it to organize it in a way when you have the specific subjects, but as you say, it might be easier to integrate them yourself.
Well, I really hate to invoke Amazon in this context. Any good shopping site has a feature wherein I click on that beautiful pair of large black shoes, and something comes up that says, you might also be interested in. And those sophisticated algorithms, I think, carry over into the way that people want to learn, right? We're curious about the adjacencies. And I think technology helps us to do that kind of serial exploration into related content and topic matter, learning, as using those metrics to have the site become customized to your learning experience. So over time, the data that it's learned about what you choose to explore can drive the way that information is offered up to the learner going forward, and that's very exciting.
Steve,
I think it inevitably keeps us in content streams, even if there's an adjacent stream that we found interesting. And I go back to thinking about who you need to hire. You need to hire people who know how to do some pretty, some human interaction skills. Maybe people who have, have been the teacher, have been the student, and maybe have taught a colleague in school, for example. So I think that, my sense, and I'm happy to be wrong about this, but my sense is that the kind of things that technology-assisted learning or online learning is best at is practicing the algorithm. What it doesn't give us is that trigonometry actually was invented for a reason.
Well,
that calculus was invented for a reason, okay? And so, I'm sorry, I interrupted briefly, but, why was trigonometry invented? Do you happen to know why trigonometry was invented?
No, why was it invented?
I'm not sure that I know, but I know that I have to
Maybe
learn
we should
algebra.
ask an Montessori pupil here.
Well, maybe you know why. Actually, I still want to take a hazard at it. But the point is that we have to learn algorithms. Yes, that's quite right. We have to learn algorithms. But I think it's also very interesting and maybe a little bit harder to quantify that. Let's see, trigonometry may have been invented in ancient Egypt as a way of repeating land surveying after the annual flood of the Nile. And so, hey, what do you know? People had this problem where they had to reallocate previously allocated parcels of land, which meant they had to invent surveying. And by the way, a tool of surveying is being able to create like a right angle and all that goes along with that, okay? So now I'm learning about human history. Now I'm thinking, wow, there are people who came before us who had problems that this particular solution solved. Now we could choose to teach subjects in this rather integrated way. We still need to learn the algorithms. And my sense is, and again, I'm happy to be wrong about this, my sense is that a lot of online learning is a lot like sort of programmed practice. One of the great things about Khan Academy is you can watch that lesson over and over and over while you're trying to make the cognitive jump. But I think that lesson looks like it takes place on a blackboard. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I wonder if there's a richer experience that's available that might lead to the kind of things that you need to hire.
Yeah, if I can comment on that. I think, of course, the good with online teaching is that you can monitor everything what you do, and in that sense you can do the analytics and you can propose new way of learning because actually these guys were doing this and it ended up in doing this kind of grade, and then you can get these kind of recommendations through the process. That's very efficient and extremely important, I think. The other thing is that, at least from my perspective, when it comes to employee, they like to discuss problems and to solve problems in a more global way. So if you are looking at a program or you have following a session, at least if you can communicate through some kind of social kind of close network discussing these kind of session, and you have the common language so that you can do it, that is very, very favorable, and that connects students into the problem solving. And at least that is very important also when you come out into work, of course, because that is the way you operate, at least in global companies.
And in a way, the technology, like the Khan Academy and the technology you talk about, frees up the teacher's time so that the teacher can help integrate the training in a way. So I think it's important to look at it as this way, and not sort of shift the community learning or take it out because there is a technology.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's possible to apply the theoretical knowledge you gain through videos and exercises online as well. What you bring up is definitely true, that you can have a more creative classroom experience once you have the lecture or flip the classroom, like you said. But John Wessig at Khan Academy, who's a well-known JavaScript programmer, he had created a unique platform where our students can make a program and see the changes as they happen in a separate window. So that's very real world like, where you're actually applying principles that you've learned through Khan Academy, for example, in actually creating your own project. And you can share that project with other students, and students can take the project, build on that, and cooperate that way. And they can even vote on the best project, give feedback. So I think it is possible to just do that kind of stuff online.
I'm really glad you mentioned that because, who's going to learn the best? The person who's going to learn the best and maybe learn the most, even outside the subject area, is those who think about how to create this lesson. I didn't know that was available, and I think that's fantastic.
I think on this point, there's some topics where this can be done fully online. There's other topics where you need a mix, right? So if I'm learning how to code, I can learn about it online, and I can do it online, and I can get that practice and the theory at the same time. But if I'm learning how to, build a house, I can only get so much of it online without actually going and getting my hands dirty and doing something about it. And so I think there's So I think it sort of depends on what you're learning. The other thing, though, I wanted to say about this idea of adjacencies with Khan Academy is I think it enables curiosity. So I went on Khan Academy just to check it out about 6 months ago for the first time. I was a latecomer to it in 2008. You put me to shame. But I watched a video about the two fronts of World War II, or World War I, actually. And then I was like, oh, well, this is interesting, but I don't know anything about that Eastern Front. And so then I went on Khan Academy and I was like, okay, tell me about this part of Russia. And then I got a video about the geography of Russia there. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, okay, well, tell me next. But you get, because there's just such a vast wealth of information there, it enables you to ask these questions and then learn something about it immediately.
I just want to say, I think that the pedagogy and the technology are evolving very rapidly. We're learning about how we can get as close as we can to a really rich classroom involvement, so we can build in interactivities that let people build things online themselves and get immediate feedback. We can have them giving what's called user-contributed content, so they are creating a lesson or offering expertise or standardized learning, and then we build in badging, social badging, so they hear from their peer community about whether they've done it well or not. They get that kind of dynamic feedback, and I think this is going to continue to get better and better. And it will never be as great as the experience. You know, if you ask yourself, what do you remember from your learning experience, it's never going to be something that you engaged with digitally. And that won't be true for our kids and our grandkids either. It's going to be the things they did with other people and human beings. Yeah.
And this is what I guess with Greg is so much talking about, the connection, the cognitive empathy, the team building, and the leadership, which is what I guess you are asking Spilling about. If that's how, is that the most important? Are they? And what you're saying also is the creativity that you're looking for, not necessarily the degrees they have, but of course you have to have a basic skill set.
Yeah, I think, and it's connected in the sense that most of those who need education the most are not able to access it. And that is one thing. How do we actually provide that to in that sense, internet to the people, and then really start to make fun and so that people can start investigating. I think an example is that we did this kind of competition. How fast can you use a mobile phone to get information on the internet in Bangladesh? And in that sense, it was a cooperation with Wikipedia. And that creates thousands of young people in engagement to use these kind of tools to really get knowledge through the Wikipedia site. And of course, that is enormously a good example of how you can take that into the more educational, professional world. And those are the people who really needs it, and they will just speed up tremendously fast. But it's connected. You have to provide the, let's say, cheap handsets or tabs, and it has to be very cheap because they don't have money. And then you are start rolling when you look at it as a whole.
Rebecca, you are focusing much on ethics also, as well as technology. How do you manage to combine the two?
You know, I think we don't talk enough about ethics and what's happening in the digital space. We get together and we have conferences and we talk about all the remarkable things that digital learning will allow us and allow you learners to do. And I won't rattle off this, but what we don't spend enough time, I think, thinking about and talking about and learning about is anything that has tremendous power can be used for good or for evil, right? And in the United States, we're starting to have a real problem with what's called cyberbullying, where the same features of social internet-enabled learning, the immediacy, the ability of somebody to come out of nowhere and make a very public statement, it can be used by young people to humiliate and harm one another. And we're doing some research now with Facebook to try and understand what are the key points of leverage to help those young people understand and internalize the responsibilities they have in the digital space, and what are our shared responsibilities. When we're doing things in terms of corporate social responsibility, how do we weigh the imperative to do good in the world and also to do well? And to have some kind of ROI for our sponsors. I think these are questions that we need to understand better and to be talking about more. I hope this conference will be part of that conversation.
Steve, you had...
This is really relevant. We kind of find ourselves talking on both sides of what I think of as a content capability divide. And so, one of the great gifts of online learning is that, boy, content we can do, and we can talk about the different ways. I haven't been on Khan Academy longer than you haven't been on Khan Academy. I was once, But what I think about is lost afternoons to Wikipedia. Okay, you're suddenly, wow, it's dark outside. I really got to take a shower. This day's gone away from me. Yeah, we like to explore content, but you're really beginning to address capability, the capability of interacting with others in a respectful manner that require, I believe those things require a certain kinds of interactive experience that can't be taught. There is no 3-ring notebook with the 2 free DVDs on how to be a moral person. There's a lot of recommendations on how to be a moral person. We can learn about morality, but at the end of the day, I'm probably going to treat my colleague here at the end of the room better, on the road better, if we have a shared social experience together. And I don't think in any way the online learning is going to eradicate social experiences. But I think there are certain kinds of social experiences that can lay the foundations for morality within the online space. And just because they happen to be in the same class in junior high school, in math class or whatever, it doesn't mean they're going to necessarily have that kind of social experience that would lead to morality online.
Two thoughts on this. One is having the in-person social interaction to lay the groundwork for online interaction is exactly what led Portland College, one of the ones that I mentioned in the talk, to sort of mix and match essentially an online delivery mechanism with kind of certain in-person interactions. And so the way they start is the very first thing they do is they bring everybody together. You've got 15 students along with a mentor in the same place to meet each other for a week that's very intensive. And then after that, a lot of the interaction happens online. But it's essentially, I think they tried it without that. And what they found is just first that most people didn't participate. And then secondly, even when they did, there wasn't this kind of the moral boundaries that we all put in place when we know each other as people. So that's I think that there is something really about how do we create those social interactions in person first to then lead to this online. The other thing that this made me think of though is there are some interesting ways that different companies are looking at combating online bullying. And one example that comes to my mind is not in education, but is online gaming. So Riot Games is a company that is behind some of the more popular online games. And they found that people were quitting the game and therefore not paying them any more money because the bullying was so bad. And so what they started doing is that trying to build in ways to improve the moral fiber of their player base, which is tough because of the anonymity involved and everything else, and the frustration when people lose and whatever else. But so then they give people messages. So like every game before you start, there's a message that pops up that says, "Did you know that people that cooperate with their teammates win more? Did you know that people that curse out their teammates lose more?" And there's I think this is clearly a space where people haven't really cracked it, but I think there's some interesting things going on right now as this becomes online socialization becomes a much bigger part of our overall social lives.
Okay, once you move the lecture out of the classroom, which isn't really social, you have 25 students listening to one expert. You can have a lot more interaction, and learning is a plenty more social experience than what is possible without technology, in my mind.
I think, to be a little bit positive in a sense, I think every social network or every, let's say, virtual institution have to be sure that it will become a good experience for those who are using it. If it continuously is becoming bullying, or people will leave that kind of society, I hope. We don't know, but I hope. But that's why I think most of those who have these kind of social networks today, if it's a game or if it's a place to be, they are starting to monitor quite a lot and try to get rid of those who really is making a bad experience for the users.
I think that's really essential. I've had the privilege of managing a listserv for my field, for pediatric neuropsychology, for about 15 years. We have over 2,000 members from all over the world, and one thing that's been really instructive for me is the importance of having a really clear set of guidelines and then really enforcing them. Because I think any online forum takes on the characteristics of its most antagonistic contributors. And there's like this emotion magnification factor when it comes through email. And so you can have, 1,500 well-behaved people, and 3 people can blow that up, and people will start leaving in droves. So it's interesting to hear about online gaming sites, or, look, man, this is a commons here. And because of the anonymity, people will do graffiti or worse in that space. How do you manage it at Con?
Yeah, I'm also a moderator, so I work with this quite a lot. And what I've learned from that is that most people are very kind. So if we spot something that could be viewed as negative, it's very very quickly removed by people who spot that and flag it. So we just make sure that nothing is removed involuntarily, or something that was supposed to be there isn't removed. So I think the majority of kids are looking after for each other, are looking after one another, and protecting each other. So I think it's working out very well in Khan Academy. But you have to be, of course, there are some challenges, and you have to protect the children from potential dangers that could be lurking out there. So there are definitely ethical issues.
Do you think there's a technology way that you can sort of give credit where credit is due and discourage inappropriate behavior? Is there a way to like upvote helpful contributions and downvote the jerks?
Yeah, you earn badges by being helpful. So gaining a lot of positive votes will gain you respect. And you can showcase these for your class and whoever you interact with on the site. So definitely it's something that Khan Academy is utilizing.
Okay, thank you. I think we are reaching the end of the session. I think we see very great potential in the technology possibilities, and we see Khan Academy as a very good example, and you can use this also for scaling up the training, and which creates huge business opportunities and responsibilities for companies like Telenor, and I'm sure also McKinsey can get skilled people for the consulting work. The interesting thing in all this, and if anybody should believe that I have a very focused mind when it comes to Montessori, I don't know why they should, but I have to say that it's interesting that 100 years ago, a person without having the neuroscience knowledge that you have observed children and saw how are they learning, and what she did is what the brain surgery is, brain knowledge now prove as the way to do things. Yeah. But then technology can expand on this, and technology is creating potential material for the children to learn more, and for us to learn more, because it is an everlasting process that we can still go on. And for us it's even easier now, because we don't have to go back to classes, we can go into our computer. So, thank you very much, but I think it's always important that we maintain the thinking of ethics and empathy in all this learning. Thank you.
Thank you.